What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at how to analyze a football match and do a tactical analysis on the match. And before we get into that and the process behind it, check out the OneFootball app. They're sponsoring today's video. It's the best app out there for all things football. You stay up to date with the latest matches all around the world and the biggest leagues. It's the app I use to stay up to date with all things football and how I can schedule the matches to make these videos possible. Now that's me on your screen scrolling through the app to show you guys some of the features. There's a free download in the description. It's the first link and you can't miss it. So if you could check that out, it'd be a huge help to the channel. And when you're in the description, be sure to check out both my books as well. There's links to them in the description, and let's get right into it. So first, a quick look at the lineups. If you know for certain what lineups are going to be, the base formation, it can be a good starting point, but really doesn't mean too much in overall importance when we do a tactical analysis, but it can be a good starting point and good reference points for the players. So now, as we see here, the field is split into 3 thirds. The first third, midfield third, and final third. And we're going to be looking at this and how each third changes a match. So it's really important, especially for me, when watching a team, that I have these reference points set up, and then the 5 vertical corridors as well. That gives us more information on the spaces being used. Now, this isn't an exact model, and like all things, there are shades of gray around these areas, but they're really good reference points when looking at a match. So now we'll look at a team in their build-up and a team in their high block. So we'll first start, how I like to do it is start from the team's build-up. So how they build from the back to move into the midfield third and then progress and create chances. But the thing about the first third in a high block or in the team's build-up, there's more space available to defend and use for the attacking team. So this then brings us to how do the teams, one, look to progress the ball into the midfield third, and how does the team pressing look to win the ball back higher up the field. Now in some of these thirds, some teams across the world try and avoid certain moments or certain situations in these thirds. So that could lead to a higher press, a higher intensity press, or a lower intensity press, or just falling back into their mid block. So here we can look at a few movements, and when we have the start structure with the team, especially in the first third, because often it started from goal kicks, so we get a really clear view on the first structure. And this gives us a good base to then look at the movements used to progress or win the ball back. So now as we look forward, the team attacking will then try and exploit these spaces to progress the ball. There's space in behind because the high block has the most space and the offsides line is set at the halfway mark. Then we have the space between the lines, which is often extended in the high block because there's not compactness available. So then we can look at the different movements teams in the offensive phase look to occupy these areas and exploit the space in behind. So this is just one if the winger comes off the wide area into the half space, occupying a more advanced area, then creating a 4-man structure in the middle of the field through the double pivot and the 2 attacking midfielders, then manipulates the defense in a certain way to try and create space either around the block or in behind. So when we have this start shape, we look at the first movement, and by knowing where they start and how the opposing team reacts to it, we have a good indication on what is happening, and then we have to look a little deeper into why it's happening. And this often comes from successful progression, which we have to be careful that it's successful because of intentional play and not quality from coincidence. So then we can look now in a defensive perspective, how to win the ball back and how teams typically use a high block to then gain an advantage by winning the ball higher up the field. And then first we can then look, so then often a key aspect in this first third is defending with man orientation, and knowing these little tendencies in general helps draw conclusions, like knowing a team in the high block usually presses with more man orientation because of the lack of compactness helps us draw conclusions, and it can help us look at how a team in the build-up might break down a team in the high block. So here we have the 8 going higher up the field, moving the number 10 on the other team, and finding the holding midfielder to give us a closer positioning on these more dangerous spaces, making it easier for them to be exploited. Now we can look at a defensive approach, and how teams can then overcome this and some common tendencies from teams pressing the high block. So we have the winger pressing from out to in using his cover shadow, which is a super common tendency at the highest levels, using their cover shadows to then block the wide area. But if the wide area can't be completely blocked, we have our fullback jumping, defending with numerical equality, and players occupying the central corridors, making it very hard to play out and play through central areas. So these are all different ways that we can look at how the first third of the field and the approach from the teams can then be used in the context of progression or winning the ball back. So now as we move into the midfield third, it's the next third of the field we'll talk about, and this then requires a mid block or a team in possession to use different tools now to exploit the space, because the space is very different. And in the mid block, they could go, the defense then controls the compactness and the space is available. And this is the most variable space because of the back line now gaining control of the offsides. So they could go with a high line with very little space between the lines with more space in behind, or they could go with a bit deeper line that then sees less space in behind, but perhaps more space between the lines. So then here, also it's important to note that this transition from the first third of the field, as we see here, into the midfield third comes with some structural changes to adequately prepare for this midfield third. So then we can see the base structure and how it's changed from the midfield third, which will give us some insight on the ways they can then look to expose their opponents in this third of the field and how it differs from the first third. This goes for offensive and defensive teams. But now we just set up our team in a 4-3-3. Slight changes now would be from our fullbacks coming more narrow to then have a more narrow back four and have better control over transitions. And again, we can't know for certain whether the team is doing this because they want control over transitions or they want the fullbacks closer to certain spaces in this midfield third. But this then comes, these conclusions come from watching the match and finding tendencies on what the team prioritizes. So then we can move into the low block, and we often see this is probably the area with the most structural changes because there's the least amount of space you have to defend. But now we can see a typical change going with the back five to then have more width, a midfield three, and two central strikers to then get good pressure on the first line of the team's attack. And then for the attacking team, then we have our fullback coming more narrow, a midfield three, that then position the eights in a bit wider area to try and overextend the midfield three of the other team, and then a front three occupying full width. So these are the 3/3 of the field you break the team into or break the game down to. And then we have the 5 vertical corridors that give you more information on the positioning of the players. Then the last thing we're left with is the transition phases, offensive and defensive transitions in these thirds of the field, which will require very different transitions. And the transitions are probably the hardest piece to analyze because they happen so fast, which sometimes requires more time going back and viewing the situation over again to then identify clear patterns. And the transitions are very volatile. That offers very different situations in each one. But I just wanted to put this video out to give you a general structure on how I look at the game, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one.